Before this quarter gets harder, and it is going to get harder, there is a chapter in your Bible that already knows what is coming, not as a prophecy, not as a warning you missed, as a description. A clear-eyed, unsentimental description of exactly the kind of economic pressure that black business owners are walking into right now. And it has been sitting in Proverbs 22 the whole time. The problem is, we were only given half of it. I have heard Proverbs 22 preached my whole life. And if you grew up in the black church, you already know which verse comes to mind first. Verse 1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. I have heard that verse at business breakfasts. At men's conferences, I have seen it on the walls of black-owned barbershops and on the back pages of church bulletins. It is a real verse, a true verse. I am not here to take it from anybody. But that verse is not the whole chapter. And the rest of the chapter, the parts that do not make it onto the wall, the parts that do not get preached at the business breakfast, those parts are the ones I need to talk about today, because those parts are the ones that actually speak to where black business owners are sitting right now, in this quarter, in this economy, with these numbers in front of them. A few weeks ago, I sat down and read all 29 verses, not the highlighted parts, not the selection somebody else made for me. All of it, start to finish, quietly, alone, and something shifted. Not because the chapter said something new, because I finally heard what it had always been saying. The parts we skipped, the parts we moved past quickly because they did not feel like the kind of thing you frame and hang on a wall. I want to read you one of those verses now. Verse 7. Same chapter, same writer. The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. That is the complete verse. Nothing after it, no qualifier, no comfort attached to the back end, no, but God will make a way. Just, this is the architecture. The rich rule, the borrower serves. You already knew that. Every black business owner in this country already knows that before they can put words to it. You feel it in the room when you are asking for what you should not have to ask for. You feel it in the terms, in the rates, in who gets the call returned. But here is what I cannot stop thinking about. That verse is in the same chapter as the one on the wall, and we almost never preach it. So before this quarter gets harder, I think we need to ask why. Let me tell you what this quarter actually looks like for black business owners, not the version that gets posted on LinkedIn, the version that is happening at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night when the motivation is gone and the spreadsheet is still open. Supply costs are up, margins are thinner than they have been in years. The customers are still there, Funsham, but they are spending differently, more carefully, more slowly, and the gap between what it costs to run a business and what the business is actually bringing in, that gap is doing something it should not be doing. It is widening, and if you went to the bank about it, or thought about going to the bank about it, you probably already know how that conversation tends to go. There is a number I came across while I was preparing for this. More than half of black-owned businesses that applied for financing recently did not receive what they asked for. Not denied entirely in every case. Just not what they needed. Partial, conditional, insufficient. The kind of answer that sends you back to the spreadsheet with less than you came with. That is not a new number. That is not a 2025 development. That pattern has been consistent across multiple Federal Reserve surveys over multiple years, which means it is not a glitch. It is not bad timing. It is the architecture. Verse 7. The borrower is servant to the lender. I am not reading that verse onto the data. The data is confirming what the verse already named. That is a different thing. That is the chapter knowing something about your quarter that your quarter has not finished teaching you yet. There is a historian, Juliet Walker, who wrote what is probably the most thorough account of black business in America that exists. And one of the things she documents, carefully, is that black businesses have never operated on the same terms as the general market. Not during Reconstruction, not during the height of Black Wall Street, not during the post-civil rights expansion. There have always been parallel structures, separate capital sources, separate networks, separate risk calculations, because the main structures were either closed or hostile. That is not ancient history. That is the foundation the current numbers are sitting on. When more than half of black business owners cannot get full financing, that is not happening in a vacuum. That is happening inside a structure with a very long memory. And Proverbs 22 was written inside a structure with a long memory too. Ancient Israel understood debt, understood what it meant to need something from someone who had more power than you. The wisdom writers were not writing from a position of comfort. They were writing for people who knew exactly what verse 7 felt like from the inside. That texture matters. This is not a chapter written for people who have never had to worry about capital. This is a chapter written for people who are already inside the pressure. And then there is the supply chain reality that nobody wants to say plainly. The tariff environment entering this year has pushed input costs up in exactly the categories where Black-owned product businesses are concentrated: retail goods, food service, small manufacturing. The businesses with the thinnest margins and the least inventory financing capacity are absorbing costs that larger competitors can distribute across scale that most Black small business owners simply do not have access to. This is not a political statement. I am not here to assign blame to an administration or a policy. I am saying the pressure is real. The pressure is specific, and it is landing on businesses that were already operating closer to the edge than the general market. Verse 7 is not a metaphor right now. It is a quarterly report. The chapter knows this quarter. It knew quarters like this one long before there were quarterly reports, and I kept reading it, past verse 7, past the economic description, looking for what it does with what it knows. And then I hit verse 16, and I had to stop, because verse 16 does something I was not prepared for. It does not tell you what to do. It does not tell you how to survive. It makes a promise, but the promise is not to you. It is about the person who has been making your quarter harder. Verse 16, he that oppresseth the poor to increase his riches, and he that giveth to the rich shall surely come to want. Read it again slowly. The one who crushes the poor to build their own wealth, they will come to ruin. The one who keeps giving to those who already have everything, they will come to want. That is the promise. That is what the chapter says will happen to the system that verse 7 described. And I have heard this verse preached as comfort. I have heard it delivered with that particular energy that says, don't worry, God sees it, they will get theirs. Hold on. And I sat with that preaching for a long time. I wanted it to be enough, but I kept coming back to something the verse does not say. It does not say what happens to you in the meantime. Think about what the verse actually contains. It contains a perpetrator. It contains a promised outcome for that perpetrator. What it does not contain, what it is completely silent about, is the person on the receiving end of the oppression, the poor person, the one whose quarter has been made harder by the architecture verse 7 described. The verse promises the oppressor's destruction. It does not promise the oppressed person's restoration. It does not say the gap closes. It does not say the business recovers. It does not give a timeline. It does not say, and after they come to ruin, you will be made whole. It just says they will fall. And I am not saying that is nothing. I'm not saying divine judgment is a small thing. I am saying that if you are a Black business owner sitting with a spreadsheet that does not balance the eventual destruction of the system that unbalanced it, is not the same thing as your rent being covered next month. Those are two different promises. And Proverbs 22 only makes one of them. I kept reading past verse 16. Into the book of Habakkuk, because Habakkuk is one of the only places in all of Scripture where someone walks up to God directly and asks the question that verse 16 leaves open. Habakkuk 1:2. O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. That is not a weak man. That is not someone who lost their faith. That is a prophet, a person who believed deeply, who had every credential, standing in front of God and saying, I see the oppression, I have been crying about the oppression, and I am still waiting for the answer. And God responds to Habakkuk, which is itself remarkable. God does not dismiss the question. God does not say, you should not be asking that. God answers. But the answer is not a rescue. The answer is, write it down. The vision has an appointed time. It will come. Wait for it. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. I have read that answer 100 times. And every time I read it, I think the same thing. That is a hard answer to take to a quarterly review. Write it down. Wait for it. It will come. That is the word of the Lord to a man watching injustice operate in real time. Not, I am stopping it today. Not, here is your immediate relief. Wait, watch, write it down. The appointed time is real even when it is not visible. And I believe that. I want to be honest with you. I believe that theologically. I am not standing here trying to undermine the faithfulness of God, but I am also a person who lives in time, who knows black business owners who are living in time, who are not waiting for an appointed future. They are managing a present that is pressing in from every direction right now. This quarter, these numbers, this month, and the comfort that says God will handle the system eventually. That comfort is true, and it is also incomplete. Because between now and the appointed time, there are decisions to make. There is work to do. There are choices about how to operate inside a structure that the chapter has described with plain accuracy and has not promised to immediately dismantle. Verse 16 does not tell you what to do while you wait. Habakkuk does not tell you what to do while you wait either, not in chapter 1. But Proverbs 22 does not stop at verse 16. And I think that is the part of the chapter that most people who handed us the good name verse forgot to mention. Because after the chapter names the architecture, and after it promises the oppressor's destruction, it shifts completely. The voice changes, the register changes, and what comes next is not comfort. It is instruction, specific, unsentimental, operational. For the person who has to keep working inside the architecture of God while they wait. Verse 17 is where the chapter changes its posture. It stops describing, it starts addressing. Bow down thine ear and hear the words of the wise, and apply thine heart unto my knowledge. That is not an invitation to feel something. That is an instruction to pay attention. Specifically, deliberately, with your whole mind engaged. The comfort section of the chapter, if you want to call it that, is behind you now. What is in front of you is a different kind of text. Scholars call this section the sayings of the wise. It runs from verse 17 to the end of the chapter, and it reads nothing like the opening verses. It reads like someone who has looked at the world clearly, including the parts that are not fair, including the architecture of verse 7, including the promised but untimed destruction of verse 16, and decided to talk about what faithful, serious, skilled work looks like inside all of that. Not instead of all of that, inside it, verse 22. Rob not the poor, because he is poor, neither oppress the afflicted in the gate. This is a business ethics instruction, plain and simple. Do not build your margin on someone else's vulnerability. Do not use your position to extract from people who have less leverage than you. The gate in ancient Israel was the marketplace, the place where commerce happened, where contracts were made, where power showed itself in transactions. Do not do that thing in the marketplace, even when you could, even when the structure permits it, even when everyone around you is doing it. And then immediately, verse 23, the reason. For the Lord will plead their cause and spoil the soul of those that spoiled them. There it is again. The same promise as verse 16. Divine advocacy for the exploited. Destruction for the exploiter. But notice what the text is doing now. It is not just describing the oppressor from the outside. It is talking directly to the person making business decisions. It is saying, you, specifically in your transactions, in your pricing, in how you treat the people with less power than you in the room, do not become the thing that verse 16 is talking about. The chapter is not just a comfort for the oppressed. It is a warning to anyone with any power at all, including black business owners who have employees, who have vendors, who have customers with less information or less leverage than they do. That is an uncomfortable thing to sit with. And I think it is supposed to be, verse 26 and 27, be not thou one of them that strike hands, or of them that are sureties for debts. If thou hast nothing to pay, why should he take away thy bed from under thee? Do not over-leverage yourself. Do not promise what you cannot deliver. Do not sign for what you cannot cover, because the system that verse 7 described, the one where the borrower is servant, will collect. It does not care about your intentions. It does not care about your vision. It will take the bed. This is not pessimism. This is the wisdom tradition being honest about consequences. And in 2025, for a black business owner navigating thin margins and expensive debt, this verse is not ancient advice. This is a current operating principle that the chapter has been trying to hand us the whole time. And then the chapter ends with verse 29. Seest thou a man diligent in his skill? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men. I want to be careful with this verse because it is easy to preach it as a prosperity promise. Work hard enough and you will end up in the right rooms. Develop your craft and the doors will open. But I do not think that is what it is saying, or at least I do not think that is all it is saying. Standing before kings in the ancient world did not primarily mean wealth, it meant visibility. It meant you could not be ignored. It meant your work had earned you a presence in rooms where decisions were made, rooms that were structurally designed to keep certain people out. For a black business owner, that framing lands differently. This is not a promise that the architecture of verse 7 disappears if you work hard enough. The chapter has never said that. What it is saying is that diligence, real diligence, skill developed to a level that cannot be dismissed, creates a kind of standing that the architecture has a harder time erasing. Not impossible to erase, harder to erase. Booker T. Washington built an entire philosophy on that distinction. And that philosophy has been both celebrated and criticized inside Black America for over 100 years, because it contains something true and something incomplete at the same time. Excellence as argument, skill as entry, work as the thing you control when you cannot control the system. Washington was not wrong. He was also not the whole answer. And Proverbs 22, honestly read, is not the whole answer either, but verse 29 is still in the chapter, and it still means something. The chapter has now done three things. It described the architecture honestly. It promised judgment on those who exploit it, and it gave specific, unsentimental instructions to the person who has to keep working inside it, with integrity, without over-leverage, with skill sharp enough to create standing. Three things held together, without resolving the tension between them. And I had to go back to verse 7 one more time, because I think that tension, the one the chapter refuses to collapse, is exactly what Black business owners are being asked to carry into this quarter. I came back to verse 7 because I had to, not because I wanted to end there. I did not want to end there. I spent time with this chapter looking for a way to end somewhere more comfortable, somewhere that felt like a landing, somewhere I could say, and here is what it all means, and here is what you should do, and here is the promise you can hold on to going into this quarter. I could not find it. And I think that is the chapter being honest with me. The rich ruleth over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. That verse does not go away after verse 29. The diligence of verse 29 does not cancel the architecture of verse 7. The promised destruction of verse 16 does not suspend the reality of verse 7 while the appointed time approaches. All three of those things are in the chapter simultaneously, held together without apology, without a resolution movement that ties them into something easier to carry. The chapter knows the architecture is real. It knows judgment is coming for those who built the architecture on the backs of the vulnerable. And it knows that between now and that judgment, there is work to do. Serious work, skilled work, work that refuses to replicate the exploitation it is living inside of. Three things at the same time, with no promise that holding all three will make the quarter easier. There is a verse in Ecclesiastes that I keep returning to when wisdom literature gets too tidy. Chapter 9. Verse 11. The race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Ecclesiastes is in the same wisdom tradition as Proverbs, same stream, same conversation about how to live seriously in a world that does not always reward serious living. And what Ecclesiastes says plainly and what it refuses to soften is that outcomes are not guaranteed. Time and chance happen to everyone. The swift do not always win the race. The skilled do not always get the favor. That is not despair. The writer of Ecclesiastes is not telling you to stop running. They are telling you to run without the illusion that the race is purely fair, to work without the illusion that the work alone determines the outcome, to be wise without the illusion that wisdom is a transaction, that if you put enough of it in, the right result comes out. Proverbs 22 is in the same tradition. It is not a transaction document. It is a description of what faithful work looks like when the outcome is not in your hands. So here is where I land, and I want to be honest, this is not a comfortable place to land. Black business owners going into this quarter are being asked to hold something heavy, the knowledge of the architecture. Verse 7. Plain and accurate. The promise that the architecture will not stand forever. Verse 16, real but untimed, and the instruction to keep working anyway. Verse 29, serious and specific and asking something genuine from you. The chapter does not tell you how to hold all three without dropping one. That is the work it leaves with you. Before this quarter gets harder, and it may. The question Proverbs 22 is actually asking is not whether you have read it. The question is which parts you actually believe. The verse on the wall, the verse nobody preaches, the promise with no timeline, the instruction with no guarantee. All of it is in the chapter. All of it is true at the same time. What do you do with a wisdom that honest?